So if you're looking for the best settings for the Steam Deck, then they're on screen right now. Bumping up the shadow resolution a little bit to 2048, as opposed to original, which is actually 1024. And then keeping everything the same, and bumping up the anti-aliasing to 4x seems to give good results. Obviously keeping the render scale at 100%, and then it's up to you whether you want the motion blur on or original. Don't put it up to extended because I feel like that adds a lot of lag, especially when you're adding those extra samples in. And those are my settings for Steam Deck. If you want to stick around though, I'm going to be benchmarking every single one of those options and seeing how they compare with some fancy little graphs. So my testing methodology consists of Adabat, Jungle Joyride Act 1. This is the most intense level in the game, so it's a pretty good benchmark. No other level comes really close, except maybe some night stages, but I'm not diving into night stages in this video. So Adabat, Jungle Joyride Act 1, we're going to go through the first section. We're going to go through the start, go through the jungle area with the quick stepping, how do you say it? Scripted area, I guess. Where the game slows you down. And then we're going to go all the way across to the infamous Pillar of Death, which lags the game. Sometimes even like freezes it for like a couple of seconds on 360. And then that's where our test will end there. So it's literally just the first little segment, about first minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes I think, of Jungle Joyride. And we're going to be seeing how the game compares all these different settings. If you're wondering how I'm benchmarking frame rates and stuff like that, I'm using a tool that I've made myself called FPSicle. Shortly after this video goes live, it will go on GitHub open source. So if you want to check that out and do your own sort of measurements for any other game, then check that out. There's a full readme on how to get it started. It is a command line only tool for now. So if you're more of a basic user, you might not understand how to use it. Try to document everything as simply as possible. So we're going to start off with anti-aliasing. So we have 2x, 4x, and 8x. The game sound is coming from the 8x feed, by the way. So right off the bat, you can see that 8x does struggle a little bit, dipping as low as 30 there, while 2x and 4x, I think I saw that they stayed above 60, which is pretty good. Moving on to this next section, this isn't really like a performance-intensive bit, but you do still see a lot of dips on the 8x. It is very demanding for the Steam Deck. For this section here, they'll basically be sort of the same, similar frame rate. We're going up to the next section, which is the interceptor section. Before that, I've got to make this cool little jump here. You don't know how much I struggled on getting this little spring jump there to go onto the rail, because going around the other way, I feel like it will create a lot of inconsistencies, because it's like a full 3D section there. So yeah, going into the interceptor bit, this is sort of the meat and bones of the test. This is where the FPS does drop a hell of a ton. You can see that 8x goes to around 30, probably even lower, but obviously this only updates a certain amount of times every second, which, by the way, you can customize how often it takes these FPS readings. We're going up to the end of that little section here. We're going to the Pillar of Death, as I like to call it. And a lot of the water textures do take a little bit of a toll on the Steam Deck hardware. And here it is, the Pillar of Death, little drop there. For the other two, not so much, but it is still noticeable. I don't think there's any getting around that. So there we go, that's the end of the little run there. Just zooming into the graph, you can see that obviously 2x AA is going to give you the best performance, but the gap isn't that great between 2x and 4x. Obviously 8x you get a pretty big substantial drop in FPS, so I'd recommend sticking to 4x anti-aliasing. The rest of these tests, I'm going to reset the settings to default, so they will all be on 2x AA, and at the end I might do a final test with everything cranked, and we'll see how far we can really push the hardware. Next up, on the topic of anti-aliasing, we're going to be going over transparent anti-aliasing on and off. Now, this is a bit of a weird setting because in places where there's not a lot going on, transparent anti-aliasing wins. But when there is a lot of stuff on screen, that's when the off setting usually works the best. So you're basically trading coins. It's like a double-edged sword. In real world scenarios in this game though, the performance is literally like not even like a frame. It's like 0.1 of a frame, and you'll see once we go through the entire level, you see the average FPS count not even being like really that far apart. But yeah, there's a lot of like places where it will like be worse, but then in other places it will be better, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's not really much to say about this one. Like, I don't really know what to say. I am using the same footage as before. I am running both of these at 8x anti-aliasing. I know I said I would keep everything default, but I thought I'd do this just so you have a better idea of like frame drops. Because on 2x you don't really get that many frame drops in that. So I thought putting it on 8x might actually reveal those little like frames a little bit more and basically make a little bit of a difference, maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure what else transparent AA actually affects. I don't know if it I don't know if it affects the water. Sorry, I'm trying to not trip on my words. But yeah, I assume the water spouts as well. Take into account that. But that's transparent anti-aliasing. Again, not a lot in it. It's up to you if you want to enable it. It's not going to kill your FPS. It's also not going to benefit you. But yeah, moving on. Next up, we're going for bilinear or bicubic for texture filtering. This is a setting which doesn't really do much. The FPS boost you get by going with bilinear is very like negligible. But however, there is a little bit of a softer touch when you go with bicubic. As you can see, the line is pretty much like neck and neck, almost. You do get a little bit more FPS, obviously, but for the softer little shadows and details, I'd recommend going for bicubic, but obviously, personal preference. We'll get to see a little bit of a FPS drop when we get to the interceptor segment. Again, I know they are a little bit desynced. I did try my best to sync these up, but obviously I didn't do a very good job. So, you know, try and take these with a grain of salt. I am using the 2x footage because that is like sort of like the baseline, because it had it off anyway. So yeah, the 2x footage is on the left and everything else but bicubic has been changed on the right. Going the interceptor section, you can see that they are pretty much neck and neck no matter what. One thing that I wish I could change was having the interceptor segment more consistent. Because of the placement of the robots and just like the way sometimes they fire like these like fireball pillars. Sometimes the lasers are like a bit different. So that's something I wish was a little bit more consistent, but obviously I can't really change that too much. Yeah, going to the Pillar of Death, as you can see, they both drop off and then they both shoot back up. So yeah, that is bilinear and bicubic. You can see the graph here, basically a little neck and neck. You do get a little bit of a drop going with bicubic, but overall I'd recommend it. Next up we have motion blur. We have the default, enhance, and no blur at all. Footage is from the no blurred version. Motion blur, it's really up to you, personal preference. Obviously you're going to get more FPS if you don't have it on. But you know, a lot of people do hate motion blur in games. So that first little bit, you can see that the enhanced does drop a little bit more frames. Obviously you're adding more samples to the blur, you're going to have a worse sort of performance. But it's actually kind of a lot more than you'd think. Obviously no blur, you're going to be even better than having the default blur. But obviously, again, your personal preference on whether you like motion blur in games or whether you hate it. Honestly, for Unleashed, motion blur I'm fine with. Like, it doesn't really take away from the experience a lot for me. But obviously a lot of people do hate that. But now we're coming up to the interceptor segment, and that will be where we can actually see how badly the game does break down. And we're going in all of them at 60, and you can obviously see that the enhanced blur does drop way more than the default and the no blur. Also, for the eagle-eyed among you may notice that the text that shows the FPS doesn't match up to the color of the line on the graph. That's just an oversight on my part. It's just colored the way it is. Sorry about that. But yeah, we're going into the Pillar of Death, and this shouldn't really have a lot of variation since we're not really doing anything. Although we are boosting, so it will have a little bit of an impact, but not as much as you think. And there we go. As I said, very end, you won't see much of an impact. You can see that the lines are all together. But honestly, motion blur is completely up to you, as I've said multiple times. Let's move on to a pretty insane one, shadow quality, since there's like 20 different options for it. So it's going to be really hard to track what's going on because there's so many screens, but you can definitely see that the maximum shadow quality is really struggling, and even in this first area here, probably because of all the shadows rendering in all the buildings and all that. And of course, you've also got Sonic Shadow as well. Default, by the way, is 1024. I don't know if I mentioned that. That's why there isn't a separate one for that one, because it's literally just the same setting. You're going to get better FPS on the 512, obviously, and obviously the worst FPS on the 8192. Coming up to the interceptor section is where we're going to see most of the sort of performance dips. We can see on the graph that all of them are pretty neck and neck except for 8192. It just shows you how much of a performance impact you're getting on that, because you're basically like squaring it every single time, like resolution. So we're going up to the intercept a bit. I know that half of them are out of sync. I tried my best to sync all these up, but like, come on, there's like 5 different things. But yeah, look at this, like 30 FPS. Do we dip down below 30? Surprisingly not, actually. Maybe with anti-aliasing set to 8, we might see lows of 20. But yeah, 8192 actually handled that surprisingly well. It didn't dip below 30, I don't think, well, at least I didn't see. Next up, the Pillar of Death. This is going to be very interesting because obviously that renders a giant shadow as well. And coming up to it here on the 8192. Oh, dipped down to 39. That's crazy. But yeah, that's the shadow quality. Feel free to watch that back, by the way, because holy crap, that is a lot of gameplay footage. So something really strange that you can see on the graph is that 512 actually performed the worst compared to the default and 2048, even the 4096. I'm not sure what actually happened here. I don't know if it's like an error within my recording, but it seemed to be sort of recurring as well. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with that setting. Might have to be something to look into on the Unleashed Recomp. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what's happened there. But you can see that roughly the best setting to go for would be the 2048, which is double the resolution of what you're getting normally, and you're not really sacrificing a lot of FPS on the table. So yeah, that is all of the options. Now I'm going to go through and crank everything to maximum and give you one last look at how the game performs. We're going to go to Apatos this time, and I'm going there because it's not as intense as Jungle Joyride. It's probably one of the most stable stages in terms of frame rate. And I feel like it's a pretty good way to end off the video with everything set to the highest it goes, except for render resolution, of course. So yeah, if you want to check out the tool that I used, it's in the description. It's free and open source. However, if you do use it, make sure to give credit where credit's due. And I hope it is useful to someone, because it was useful to me to make all this stuff. I actually added the fact that you can process multiple videos at the same time thanks to this, so that was pretty cool. I've been working on it for the past 2 weeks, and it was inspired by the tools that Digital Foundry use. I was going to make another video on like Steam Deck performance on something else, but then the Unleashed project come out. Unleashed Recomp, sorry, come out, and sort of changed my plans of videos. So I hope you're enjoying all of these Unleashed Recomp videos lately. As for what's next, I'm not sure. I'm tempted to do a full playthrough of the game at some point, and I might stream that, who knows. But well, actually no, stay tuned for some more sort of performance videos like this in the future, because now that I have this tool that I made, I can easily do them, and I'll be completely honest with myself, don't mean to beat myself up, but I think it looks pretty cool, especially when you have like 5 or 6 stacked up together, and it draws a nice little line, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, we're coming to the end of the stage. I hope you enjoyed this little like thing. I know it's not normally what I do, but I thought I might as well do it just to help out some people who are on the Steam Deck get the best settings. So if you want those settings, they're at the start of the video. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.